Origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. The Judeo-Christian worldview is not the only one that claims exclusivity, but it's the only one that takes those four questions with corresponding answers that are truthful and coherent answers that stand the test of time. And the ultimate answer of the resurrection from the dead that gives you hope and meaning.
Ladies and gentlemen, nobody says it quite like Ravi Zacharias. Today we're going to remember Ravi Zacharias, who left Earth and left a huge void in Christian apologetics, but has now gained his great reward and is beholding the beautiful, loving arms of Jesus, his Savior, as he passes from this corruptible earth to an incorruptible body, from this limited perspective of the person of Jesus, as brilliant as it was, to a now perfected and unhindered perception of who his Lord is. His passion on earth is now his closest friend and ally in eternity. And we can't help but be a little jealous that he now knows the Lord better than any of us can. But all of our times will come. And the best that we can do is learn from the legacy that he left behind, because he left behind a heck of a story. I had the opportunity to pick a paper topic a couple months ago about a certain philosopher or defender of the faith, and I chose Ravi Zacharias, not knowing that he had some compromising health conditions that were going to end his life May 19th, but I was just intrigued by who he is as a defender of the faith, because it is hard to pin him down into a certain methodology of apologetics. So I'll bring out a few of the things that I found in that, and then I want to get into some people's thoughts just about who he is, and then I want to look at some of his quotes, what we can learn from those quotes. I will leave no stone unturned in my pursuit of truth. Ravi Zacharias spoke those words on a bed of suicide while he was a university student at the age of 17. The pressure to perform had overwhelmed him to the point of hopelessness and depression. What was his dream that had fallen so short? Well, he wanted to be a professional cricket player. That's all he thought about. Academics were a side issue, and his grades, as brilliant as he is, his grades were average at best. In his despair, Zacharias gathered a fistful of pills and thought he might end all the hardships that life was throwing at him. He woke up in a hospital bed, now knowing that he didn't really want to die, yet he still faced the chance that he might. God led this minister from Ravi's university to that hospital room, and for the first time, the message of Christ seemed relevant and real. He had Ravi read from the book of John, chapter 14, where Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father but by me." But it was a different verse that really stood out for Ravi, and it would launch him into a new life. It simply read, "Because I live, you will live also." The promise of Christ took root in Ravi. That's where Ravi began his pursuit of God and his service to him. As a philosopher, Ravi seemed most dependent on the question of what it means to be human. There may be no apologist who has delved so deeply into this battle-tested question. This means that while one side of his goal chart must list present the person of Jesus as sufficient and irresistible, the other side must list explain the human condition. Christ as sufficient and irresistible, and the human condition. If the listener can tie these two ends together tightly, then they have grasped what Ravi has been trying to present. Ravi often ties these two ends together by exploring the following four desires and mysteries: origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. Among other places, Ravi spoke on this at the 2018 Defending the Faith conference. Ligonier summarized this speech as a look at the importance of understanding our origin as image bearers of our divine Creator so that we can understand the meaning of life, what morality entails, and our final destiny. Our origin as creatures made in the image of God is the only thing that can give our lives meaning and serve as the basis for ethical living. There are so many positive things to highlight from the approach and the lifestyle of Ravi Zacharias. Most importantly, an apologist is somebody who needs to have a deep personal connection with God. As it is with worship leaders and pastors, one's personal devotional life comes to the surface when the person is in the public eye. Without this strong sense of desperation and dependence on God, the apologist will risk self-sufficiency, which will be revealed in the way that he treats others. Remember 1 Peter 3:15. It's obviously a significant verse for apologetics, but the first part of that verse needs great consideration. Sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts. Ravi seems to embody this well. Ravi's focus on the heart, emotions, and the will needs to be appreciated. His intention about blending the heart and the mind is very noble and necessary. Many people assume that faith is only about the sensations of the heart, and many people think that apologetics is completely about cognition devoid of feeling. To be fully human is to find the effective expression of both in this unifying manner. Along with this, his vision of helping the thinker believe and the believer think is a wonderful focus. Thinking is both a correcting mechanism and a strengthening mechanism. Presenting good logic and information can have many far-reaching effects. Now, Ravi avails himself to a variety of methods which seems necessary in order to give the most effective answers to those who are asking questions. The fact that he focuses on the individual is a significant reminder to anybody doing apologetics that winning the person is more important than winning the argument. Not that you need to necessarily sacrifice one for the other. Ravi's use of story helps put complex ideas into these memorable forms. Stories are not just memorable, but they often explain something that charts and facts and data alone can't quantify. They evoke feelings that syllogistic logic often finds hard to come by. This speaks to the fact that some things are not resolved by solid argumentation alone. Stories let the listener know that the issues of apologetics strongly relate to real life. Story is also a method that works well with a lot of the Eastern world, as many of them are raised with an appreciation of parabolic stories, as Ravi was. They are also friendlier toward the sense of mystery that can result from such stories. We in the West have a hard time with that. Ravi's accumulation of wisdom and knowledge is really to be admired. It's apparent that the reading that he dedicates himself to is not light reading. Instead, it's reading and conversing that continues to challenge. This is why Ravi could speak intelligently about the fine-tuning of the universe on one hand, and about the disgusting feelings generated from a tour of Auschwitz. He can speak of the meaning of the crucifixion as well as about the flawed system of Marxism. Here are some of the things that Ravi can be remembered for saying. Probably got a good 15 or 20 of them here. The story of the gospel is the story of eternal life. My life is unique and will endure eternally in God's presence. I will never be no more. I will never be lost because I will be with the one who saves me. What a thing to remember right now, isn't it? That's from Seeing Jesus from East to West. Here's another quote. Truth is generally measured in 3 ways. Logical consistency, empirical adequacy, and experiential relevance. So when Ravi spoke, he would tie those 3 things together. Logical consistency, empirical adequacy. So you got the philosophy, the science, experiential relevance. You've got the psychology of it. You've got the mind and the will blending together. From the Grand Weaver, quote, a purposeful design emerges when the Father weaves a pattern from what to us may often seem disparate threads. Even today, if you will stop and attend to it, you will see that God is seeking to weave a beautiful tapestry in your life. And that quote reminds me of just the unexpected turns that Ravi's life would take from the bed of suicide, and he continues to recall that story to put him back in that place of humility, but also to kind of look at the journey, the distance of the journey that he took, not just from India to Canada and the United States, but in the way that he thought. And on the obituary page on RZIM, I saw that he went to a fortune teller, a palm reader, and the palm reader back in India said, yeah, it looks like you don't really have a life outside of the nation of India here. It looks like you're not going to be doing much traveling. Gotta love the irony of that. But God weaves this beautiful tapestry into his life and into our lives. From Reflecting on the Logic of God, quote, I am convinced that Jesus Christ alone uniquely answers the deepest questions of our hearts and minds. A simple quote, but that summarizes so much of how Ravi thought. From one of his talks, quote, there are 4 areas in which you look for absolutes: evil, justice, love, and forgiveness. Evil, justice, love, and forgiveness. Where in the world did these 4 converge? Where did evil, love, justice, and forgiveness converge at a moment in history? Can I take you to a hill called Calvary and show you the person of Jesus Christ? Here's a quote popularized by Ravi, but that he derived from G.K. Chesterton. Quote, Christianity has not been tried and found wanting. It has been found difficult and not tried. Another quote, "The one who says conversion is a matter of the heart and not the intellect ends up presenting intellectual arguments to convince others of this position, so goes the process of self-contradiction." Finding quotes like this was part of the difficulty in trying to pin down Ravi's apologetic approach. At some points, he says that it is the will of the person that keeps him from coming to faith, and other times he says, no, the intellect is a major factor in a person coming to the faith or rejecting the faith or the quality of his faith. Here's the one that I'll probably most remember from Ravi, related to the moral argument. Quote, "When you're saying there's such a thing as evil, you must admit that there is such a thing as good. If you're saying there's such a thing as good, you must assume that there is a moral law by which you can differentiate between good and evil. But if there is a moral law, you must assume that there is a moral lawgiver, but that's exactly who you're trying to disprove, not prove. The question self-destructs." Finding the self-destruction in the moral argument is something that many people have done, but who says it quite like Ravi? Who can say it in that way and not leave the person feeling torn down, but feeling built up, feeling cared for? Another Ravi quote, "In the economy of God, we are meant to love people and use things. In the human economy, we have ended up loving things and using people." Wow, isn't that the truth? Quote, "The purpose of prayer and of God's call in your life isn't to make you number one in the world's eyes, but to make him number one in your life." Man, that's convicting too. Remembering that prayer is not to make me great, but it is to make him great in my perspective. Absolutely. Quote, "A man rejects God neither because of intellectual demands nor because of the scarcity of evidence. A man rejects God because of moral resistance that refuses to admit his need for God." So there you go. A little bit of a presuppositional twist, but something that exposes the longings of the human heart on the one hand, but the rebellion of the human heart that's coupled with it. Quote, "My goal is to satisfy the hunger and longing for those who are seeking the truth." Ravi would have a way of making curious people who maybe didn't come curious, and making seekers out of those who hadn't really been seekers, and to making better thinkers out of those who maybe haven't applied a whole lot of thinking to their faith. And one more here, if you believe in subjective morality, why do you lock your doors at night? Those last 4 quotes are thanks to churchleaders.com. Here's some thoughts from 7 apologists. First 2 with Ratio Christi. Kayleen Fieger said, "Our move to campus ministry and then into the arena of apologetics ministry ourselves has been encouraged and undergirded all along the way by what we've learned from and seen in Ravi, who has followed the Christ he loves so faithfully. So from a young age, Ravi's life has impacted mine, and I am so very grateful." There were a few different phases in Kayleen's life that Ravi would come in and provide this nudge of encouragement to finally get into an area that she's very thankful that she's in now. She also cited this quote, "If truth is not undergirded by love, it makes the possessor of that truth obnoxious and the truth repulsive." Let's remember that when we're evangelizing, sharing our faith, defending our faith. Corey Miller, president of Ratio Christi, he said, "Ravi Zacharias was one of the first Christian thinkers in my life whom God used to shape my passion for truth. His articulation and acuteness at addressing issues combined with his demeanor and compassion are winsome characteristics sorely needed to productively engage the culture. May God multiply Ravi's impact around the world." End quote. Amen to that. And as we are disappointed that Ravi won't get to tear down another argument or address another question or give another talk, we know that that impact is deeply rooted. And I know there are some writings of Ravi's that he had intended to release after his death, so we can look forward to those. And the ministry that he's established, RZIM, is firmly grounded there in Atlanta. Sean McDowell said, "Ravi models what it means to be gracious in his interactions with others. While he is clearly brilliant and well-studied, he always aims to show kindness to others, which is why I admire his demeanor and have often tried to imitate it myself." End quote. I would just like to say to Sean McDowell, you do imitate it well, my friend. You are a very gracious apologist as well, and a good thinker. Hugh Ross, who had a long history of interacting with Ravi and of doing speaking engagements alongside Ravi, after Hugh's scientific presentations, Ravi would follow with an exquisite articulation of the philosophical and theological implications of this evidence. His eloquence always amazed me, and still does. he can turn a phrase in such a way that listeners, even years later, readily recall both his words and their impact. Michael Brown said, Ravi is a prince and a giant in the apologetics community, a man of eloquence, grace, and brilliance. And with his Indian background, he brings a much-needed world perspective. What a joy it is to be able to point seekers and skeptics to Ravi's words of wisdom. And how thankful we are that we're in a YouTube age when these words of wisdom will not be lost, right? Mary Jo Sharp, blogger, speaker, author, and apologetics professor at Houston Baptist University, she said, Ravi, with his warm smile, kind eyes, theological thoughtfulness, and deep love of Christ, reaches out across generations and cultures. I've heard him quoted by teenagers, senior adults, and every age in between. His works have helped us to understand the difficult questions of life and to navigate our own lives with grace and truth. He's someone who sees each human being in a manner that reflects how Jesus sees them. Ravi's love of his fellow mankind is immense. That love pierces the heart of the hardened, brings the heartbroken to a safe harbor, and inspires the imagination of us all. And then Doug Grotice, philosophy professor up at Denver Seminary, he says, I cannot count the number of my students who learned apologetics and got passionate about apologetics through the speaking and writing ministry of Ravi Zacharias. Few Christian statesmen grace the platform with better logical skills, more passion, greater eloquence, or deeper conviction than this soldier for Christ. Thank you to stream.org for these quotes. And I can just echo what Grotice says there, and Mary Jo Sharp as well, about the scope of age groups that seem to be affected by Ravi's style of speaking, and the way that Ravi could break down walls between the church or between certain kinds of thinkers and an apologetic sort of thinker. I don't know if there's anybody in this age that's done more to spread apologetics to the normal church folk, radio listening folk, because he would get on the radio with his Let My People Think episodes or maybe the snippets that he would release. And people key in. People that usually wouldn't give an ear for apologetics key in to these episodes from Ravi. And anytime I would mention, I'm studying apologetics, that's kind of my thing, they'd say, oh, who's your favorite? And maybe 3/4 of the time, I hear people say, Ravi Zacharias. You know Ravi Zacharias, love Ravi Zacharias. He's one of the ones that's affected me. So he's been a stepping stone into the apologetics community for so many. I'm thankful I got to see Ravi one time. Not to diminish the other speakers, because they were awesome, but the reception that Ravi got, you can tell the impact that he had. Because I've never been anywhere, let alone in a church, where the person before he speaks gets a full standing ovation from the entire crowd. And eventually he had to kindly ask the crowd to take their seats so that he could begin talking. They decided to give him a Lifetime Achievement Award, surrounded him with people from his native India dressed in the Indian garb and doing kind of an Indian celebration for him. It was a pretty special time. On the one hand, everybody deserves our honor and is valuable in the eyes of God, but on the other hand, nobody is self-made. And that's what the bed of suicide that Ravi continues to tell, that's the impact that it makes. Lest you become a follower of Ravi Zacharias or a worshiper of Ravi Zacharias or forget the thing that he's trying to point to, he draws back to these humbling stories. What does he want from each person that he would talk with? And someone said, if Ravi had the time, he would talk with everybody in the crowd. He would want to meet everybody, hear a little bit of their story. But why? Because he so deeply loved Christ, he was consumed with loving people. And he wanted to shower the love of Christ that he sensed in his life onto other people. And if you ever for a moment thought, I'm not much of a Christian, but I sure am a Ravi Zacharias lover, he would be incredibly disappointed. His heart would be broken if you said that you loved him but didn't know Christ. At the end of the day, all it boils down to, when you're suffering from a terminal cancer, laying on a bed and don't have much that you can say, all the accomplishments that you've accumulated by that time, all the things that you've done as a philosopher or as an educated guy or as an apologist, they don't much matter anymore, do they? Ravi got to watch his friend Nabil Qureshi a few years earlier go through that same path, and Norm Geisler about a year ago. Amidst all the accomplishments, when you're laying on that bed, not much matters other than, because I live, you also will live. In this RZIM obituary, there toward the end, Michael Ramsden is the new president of RZIM. He and Ravi were in Cyprus at the grave of Lazarus. And the grave of Lazarus said that, in addition to identifying Lazarus, said 4 days dead, a friend of Christ. And Ravi recalled turning to Michael Ramsden and saying, if all I'm remembered for is being a friend of Christ, that would be all I want. Does that put your goals and your accomplishments into perspective? It should. What is greatness in this life? Notoriety? Millions of views? Setting up an organization? Traveling the world as a speaker? Having lots of people walk out saying, oh, that was amazing? A standing ovation? Selling tons of books? I think Ravi would give that all away to say, I would rather be a friend of Christ than to have all this world. Thankfully, he could have both. But the notoriety, the books, the applause, those were all side issues, byproducts of a man who just wanted to pursue Christ with a passion, with thoughtfulness, and with his heart. Any of us can do the same. Many of the last will be first, and the first will be last. If you're disappointed that you'll never be quite the person that he is, quite the person that this other person you look up to is, can you be remembered as a friend of Christ? Because that's all that he wanted. All the glitz and glamour, all the crowds must be overrated. Because when you know Christ, you have all you need. And for people that have all the things of this world and Christ, they then see the lame value that these things of this world possess. Why chase the world now? Let's pursue Christ. Let's be friends of Christ. In addition, let's grab on to the wonderful things that Ravi has contributed to our knowledge of Christian apologetics and how to engage with our world. Let's be defenders of truth with grace and with intelligence, answering not just a question, but a questioner, remembering the person behind the issue. And as we commit to leave no stone unturned in our pursuit of truth, Christ will bring amazing results. It may not be the same as that person's results, but it will be a satisfied heart because you've made him all that you want, all that you need. And when you have the embrace of Christ, the fame of earth will soon be forgotten. And you'll look to him, who's the author, the perfecter of your faith, and the only one that you ever needed to pursue in this life. We're thankful for the life and ministry of Ravi Zacharias. I hope he's been an encouragement to you. And I hope that you continue to grow toward Christ-likeness. Until next time, friends, I love you, and may God bless and guide you.
And the Apostle Paul says, behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall all not sleep, but we shall all be changed at the moment, the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. And so the songwriter says, but just think of stepping on shore and finding it heaven, of touching a hand and finding it God's, of breathing new air and finding it celestial.